right, guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman. I am joined by my co-host, Scott Karasik. We are back this week to talk about Falcons training camp. We preview their upcoming preseason matchup against the Miami Dolphins. We'll talk about Jalen Collins' suspension. We'll talk about other stuff going on with the Falcons in training camp, as well as answering your guys' mailbag questions also. All right, so as we often do, we start off the show talking about any recent roster moves. Obviously, Jalen Collins' suspension is one, but that freed up a roster spot for the Falcons to bring along Kelvin Taylor, the running back from the University of Florida, the son of the great Fred Taylor. Scott, what are your thoughts on this move?
I liked Kelvin when he was in college. I thought he was going to be a good fit in the NFL, and I thought when he got drafted by the 49ers, it was like, hey, this is the right running back for what Chip Kelly likes to run with all the inside zone and the trap schemes, because that's basically what they run at Florida. I think he'll do very well here. I think he's a good fit. He may not make the roster as the third running back or even the fourth running back, but I think he'd be a good fit as a practice squad guy at a minimum.
Yeah, I don't know much about Kelvin Taylor, to be honest with you, other than sort of his pedigree and whatnot. I vaguely remember him when he was coming out, but because the Falcons didn't really need a running back last year's draft, I didn't pay too much attention to him. So I don't, hopefully he'll compete. We'll get to see him this preseason, see maybe he can sort of manage to push for a depth spot, since that running back position is apparently might be a little bit more open than people expected. You're probably right. It's probably, he's probably best case scenario is a practice squad spot rather than a roster spot, but we'll see how it goes. He could wind up being, I'm trying to think of some obscure running back that made the team. I guess Anton Smith was probably the last guy that we had that sort of came out of nowhere and made the team. But something like that, yeah, I could see that certainly working out for him in the future. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the reason why Kelvin Taylor was able to add a little bit. We mentioned it, so let's go a little bit more in depth in it. That's the suspension of Jalen Collins. Apparently, the no big deal that I talked about last week on last week's show with him being third string was kind of a big deal, because the reason why he was being buried on the depth chart was because the team knew that the suspension was potentially hanging in the balance. And we found out this past week that he would be serving a 10-game suspension due to his second violation of the NFL's performance-enhancing drug policy. So, Scott, thoughts on this?
I think it's absolutely stupid on his part to do this. I think it's dumb. You get a list of what you can and cannot take. You have an agent, you have a manager, you have people there in the Falcons facility who will sit there and double check every single thing you take and make sure it's able to be taken. And he didn't use his resources to make sure he didn't have a second violation. I can forgive the first. I have no problem being like, all right, well, one time it was stupid. If it happens again, that's just really absolutely dumb. So to me right now, like, my view is trade him, because he's not going to learn. He's not going to learn if he sticks around. He's not paying attention. He doesn't give he doesn't care about the team. If he can't figure out, hey, I need to go and use my resources and make sure that I can be on the field to help this team. Him missing 10 games, I know you're talking about like, oh, the brotherhood, they've got to stand behind him and all this on Twitter all day, right? My view is he's letting the brotherhood down. When you look at like a military type situation, if someone fails a drug test the first time, they put them into some sort of rehab, they come back, they're fine. The second time, they kick them out. It's a similar type brotherhood they're trying to build there at Falcons camp. So for me, like, I think they could trade him, and I'd be happy with the 6th or even the 7th round pick at this point. and just cut ties, because I don't think him staying in Atlanta is going to help him.
Well, I disagree with that. I think if when a person needs help, if he needs help, but I think you have to give him a support system. And I think kicking him to the curb doesn't teach him anything that he already doesn't know. Like, he already knows that he should double check his supplements. The fact that you talk about how simple an issue it is, you're right. It's a stupid mistake. He made a poor choice of judgment or whatever it is. We don't know exactly what he tested positive for. He could have just taken the wrong cold medicine or the wrong allergy medicines. We have no idea. But, all that being said, because of the ease of which how simple a mistake it is, this is not like, I think people acting like this is some sort of like systemic problem is an overreaction. Like, it's a simple fix. It's like, oh, okay, next time, do better job monitoring what you put in your body. Like, it's not a big deal. Like, you got, any number of players can get multiple suspensions. Yeah, it usually doesn't go beyond one suspension, one PED suspension. Usually guys learn their lesson. But if it takes him 2 strikes to learn his lesson, then fine. Like, I don't understand why there's this sort of push to kick Jalen Collins out the door. I think he's still an asset that potentially, if he messes up one more time, guess what? His NFL career is done, so it takes care of itself. He only has one more strike left. I don't see what message you're sending to the player by cutting him. This whole notion of he's got to be held accountable for his actions. Like, you don't show accountability by cutting a suspended player. The suspension is the accountability. He's already being punished. Like, if the Falcons had cut Michael Vick when he was suspended, it wouldn't have been like, oh, the Falcons are finally showing Michael Vick that he's accountable for his actions. Like, him being in jail is him being accountable for his actions. Like, the Packers didn't cut LaTroy Guion today because he had a PED suspension. They'd known about that suspension, that 4-game suspension, for 6 months. They cut him because they probably found out that the DUI he had in June after the PED suspension is going to cause him to be suspended more. So why did they cut him? Because he's dead weight. Jalen Collins, I don't think he's dead weight yet. I think we need to see what's going to happen with this cornerback position. I think we need to see what's going to happen with him. If we get to November and we can't afford to give up a roster spot to bring Jalen Collins back on the 53, then fine, cut him. If you want to trade him next March because some team's willing to give you a late round pick or a body on the offensive line, then trade him. But like, between now and then, like, until you have to make the decision to basically shit or get off the pot, I don't see any reason why you would make that decision, right? And I think that's why the Falcons haven't held him accountable yet, because they realize that until they find out what they have with this rest of this cornerback depth, none of whom are proven, then, might as well just wait and see what happens. I don't get people's frustration. It's PEDs. It's literally like the least offensive thing an NFL player could do. It's literally the easiest thing to fix. It's not like he's on weed. It's not like he's got his second DUI. It's not like he's beating up women. It's a minor issue because he may have taken the wrong allergy medicine. People act like this is a huge problem. Like, I think it sends a better message to the Brotherhood that the Brotherhood will still be there to help him out, as opposed to, oh, because you got suspended twice, you get cut. Every player already knows that message. Like, if you're not good enough, you're going to get cut. Every player already lives with that message. That doesn't solidify that message. Like, why would you give Sarkisian another chance? Why would you keep Rashid Hageman around for a year when he's got domestic violence and child neglect charges, and then you're going to cut Jalen Collins because he took a bad supplement? Like, what? Like, how does that make any sense? I don't get that at all. But it's Dan Quinn's team. If he wants to cut him, then that's Dan Quinn's choice. Dan Quinn has the right to make his decisions. That's fine. But to me, it doesn't make any sense.
I'm not saying cut him. I'm saying you got to get something for him. I was probably saying cut him yesterday because I was frustrated, because I kept thinking, you know what? He's got all these resources available to where he can do this and not be stupid about it. He's got to not be stupid. He's got to look at what he's putting into his body and realize what's going on. Because at this point, it's ridiculous. It's one of those things. What happens if it's a third time, Aaron? What would you say then?
His career's over, so it doesn't matter at that point because 2-year suspension, he's not coming back. No one comes back from a 2-year suspension. So it's done. It's a wrap. It takes care of itself. So, like, if it happens a third time, guess what? Doesn't matter whether the team cutted him before because it's over. It's a wrap.
I get frustrated with that kind of stuff. I really do.
It doesn't bother me that much. I mean, like, I don't really care about PEDs. Like, it's one of those things. Like, I'd have a much bigger issue if this was like his second DUI. But like a PED, like the things on the banned substances list, like it could, like, again, we don't know exactly. He could have been, I don't know, shooting up friggin' testosterone, HGH or something like that, for all we know. Or he could have just taken the wrong cold medicine. It's like that simple. And people, I don't understand people's sort of indignation over PEDs. It's like all these players take supplements. People act like this is somehow this huge issue. Like, they all take supplements. It's like arbitrary what's banned and what's not. What's an illegal stimulant and what is an illegal, it's confusing. It happens. Like, there's been 63 guys that have been, suspended for performance-enhancing drugs. Lane Johnson just served his second suspension last year. I bet you no one's going to be sitting here, like, if the Eagles decided to hold Lane Johnson accountable, right, and cut him, I bet you no Falcon fan is going to be like, no, I don't want Lane Johnson around because he's bad. Alshon Jeffrey, Rob Dinkovich. I mean, Wes Welker got a PED suspension. He's been in the league for 12 years. Does that mean he's a bad teammate? No, it doesn't. Antonio Gates. The list goes on and on. So I just don't understand why people are making this out to be this huge. I mean, Haloti Ngata had a PED suspension 2 years ago. Robert Mathis, one of the greatest.
But how many of them had two?
Like, who cares? Like, why is 1 versus 2 that big a deal? It's 2 mistakes.
2 says I didn't learn the first time.
Okay. And what? So, like, why does that matter? I don't understand. Like, what suddenly, if it's okay to have 1, but then you have 2.
It's forgivable to have 1. It's not okay to have 1. You shouldn't have any. You shouldn't have any PED suspensions, period. However, you can forgive the first one because it could be a mistake, like taking the wrong cough medicine or not remembering to get your therapeutic use for your Adderall, like what it was for Joe Holloway. I can forgive that. I forgave it last year because I was like, all right, 4 games, he probably, forgot to get a therapeutic use for Adderall or something stupid like that. No big deal. But at this point, like, it's his second time. He should know better. He should absolutely know better at this point. And he should at least have been like, hey, team, can y'all give me the list of the PED stuff? Because I guarantee you somebody in the Falcons organization would have gotten back to him as quick as they could have within a day and been like, here's what you can take, here's what you can't take. Don't put this in your body, put this in instead.
I agree. But again, I don't understand why it's such a horrible thing that he made the same mistake twice. It's not that big a deal. Yeah, it hurts the team because he's gone for 10 games. I get it. I understand that. But people act like he just went around and like punched the baby in the face. It's a supplement. You literally can mess up because guess what? You overdosed on this. You took 2 pills of this one thing that if you had taken 1, you would have been fine. It could have been you got a protein. You went to a store and got a protein shake and it got mixed up. The order got mixed up. It could be literally anything that's just a mundane slip up, a slip of the mind. It happens. It's not that big a deal. And so come back. If he proves that he's humble and he's willing to work and he's willing to make the correction that he should have made last year, then it all works out just fine. I don't get why people act like the fact that he did it twice suddenly makes it like the worst thing that ever happened. Who can okay, it's fine. Whatever. I don't get it, but people are more than welcome to be upset about a second PED suspension. I don't understand why it's a big deal, but Sure. All right, let's move on to something that maybe we might agree on. All right, let's talk about the week 2 storylines. We talked about some of the things that happened last week. That was mainly getting some guys healthy back, like Takk McKinley. But this week we have a preseason game, and that means the Falcons are dropping a depth chart. Typically not necessarily the most accurate depth chart when it actually gets to the games and being whatnot. But, there's some interesting nuggets on that. Probably the biggest one, at least for me, was that we saw Ben Garland was listed as a starter at right guard. I know there's been a lot of questions about who would get the start, at least initially in this first preseason game. I heard a lot of talk about Wes Schweitzer being potentially ahead in the competition, at least in terms of people that have been at training camp every day for the last couple of weeks have been talking a lot more about Wes Schweitzer and what he's been doing as opposed to Ben Garland. So it was a mild surprise to see Ben Garland atop the depth chart. Scott, what were your thoughts on other things, including the right guard position, as far as the depth chart goes?
I mean, if Ben Garland's going to earn that job, more power to him. I'd rather see the younger guy. I'd rather see Schweitzer there just because he's younger. But, I mean, if it ends up being Ben Garland, it ends up being Ben Garland. Maybe Schweitzer gets to play left guard next year when Levitre's gone. Or maybe they view Schweitzer as a super backup at guard. Or if Matt goes down, that's when he goes back in at right guard. But I think they've got the talent there in Garland. It's going to definitely be a size upgrade from last year, regardless of who it is, which will help in pass protection. Instead of having a 6'3", 290-pound right guard, they're going to have a 6'5", 310-pound right guard who can anchor a little better, especially against those guys like Gerald McCoy and Sheldon Rankins who destroy people off the line. I do think Garland and Schweitzer will have better anchor. I do think both those guys are going to be quicker than what an older Chester was last year. And it's just, let's see how they actually perform. I think they're going to see equal snaps at right guard in the first couple of games. We won't know until game 3 of the preseason who the actual starter is. So you and I both know how those depth charts work and how it's basically like, oh, this is who we're listing as first team when it's not really at all who actually plays.
Yeah, I mean, Garland being first team, assuming that he'll be out there with the starters for that first series, it obviously means he has a slight leg up so far in the competition, but it's by no means means the competition is over. That's going to play out, as you say, over the next 2 preseason games, and then potentially the hope is by the 3rd preseason game they will have settled on one guy, and hopefully he will perform so that they don't feel like they did a couple of years ago when James Stone really struggled when he was sort of settled as the top left guard, that they feel like they have to scrap that plan and go in a new direction before the season starts. So, if Garland's slightly ahead right now, then, kudos to Ben Garland. If Schweitzer, I doubt that the situation has sort of developed to a level where there's significant separation between them. So we'll see if those guys can create any sort of separation between themselves this upcoming Thursday against Miami. Some of the other interesting things I thought about the depth chart, it was interesting to hear, at least according to D-Led, our good friend D-Led, that Dan Quinn said that Kevin Graff was the lead dog at the swing tackle position. Now, he's listed as the top right tackle, so we'll see how that goes. There's been years where the guy who's the right tackle is actually the left tackle, so we'll see how it goes. But Graff is not expected to play in this Miami game, so it'll be interesting to see if some of the other guys sort of in his absence can sort of fill the void. Another on the defensive side of the ball, I thought it was interesting that Courtney Upshaw was listed as the starting strong side defensive end. I think we've been talking a lot this offseason about potentially Derek Shelby returning to that spot or Jack Crawford manning that spot. So it'll be interesting to see if Upshaw is sort of the guy that they want out there in the base defense playing that left defensive end spot.
Hey, I'd be cool with it if he earns it. He came on it late in the year, and I'm totally okay with that. I'm perfectly okay if that's what they want to do, because I think that's them seeing, you know what, Upshaw improved. He lightened up a little bit. He came in a little bit smaller this year. You know, he's still 300 pounds, but he's not 315 like he was last year, kind of thing. And, you know, he's still going to be playing basically an inside role. He's just playing a 5-tech, which that's his best role. So let him play it. He's got to be better than Tyson Jackson.
Fair enough.
You know, provide some pass rush.
We'll get to see. Yeah, it's nice to see someone there. You know, we had Hageman there to start the season last year. Then Jackson sort of shifted back to that role by in the second half of the year, and then it seemed like Upshaw was sort of settled in there by the time we got to the playoffs. And it's nice to see sort of him being used in that role, because I think that's sort of the ideal role for him. I didn't really love him playing inside last year. I think the Falcons really didn't have any better options, so it kind of forced their hand until Hageman's emerges down the stretch. But I think this is probably the best use of Upshaw, and it'll be interesting to sort of see how the rest of the defensive line depth plays out with guys like Hageman and Crawford, presumably getting some opportunities in the nickel and whatnot. So we'll see. Okay. Yeah, so another big note, not necessarily related to Falcons in training camp, but it related to the Falcons. Last weekend, we saw Morten Andersen get inducted into the Hall of Fame. He becomes the second full-time kicker in the Hall of Fame. Morten Andersen was an early guest of this show. I think we had him on back at the beginning of 2013, and we talked to him about being in the Hall of Fame and whether or not he was going to get there. I think we both agreed that it was an eventuality. It was inevitable that it was going to happen at some point. And it's nice to see that it finally did. I didn't get to watch. I didn't get to. I chose not to watch the speeches because I was busy doing something else. So I missed it. But Scott, what did you think of Morten Andersen finally getting in the Hall of Fame?
He deserves it. He's arguably the best kicker of all time. I mean, and just the longevity of his career, just everything. He's definitely up there. Like, I don't know how you wouldn't put him in there.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I don't get why it took him so long to put him in there, because he should have been in there back in 2013. We should have had Hall of Famer Morten Andersen on our show at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was the first year he was a finalist, wasn't it, I think?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's a kicker. It happens. Like, the Hall of Fame gets backlogged. That's, you know, as long as you get in, I don't think it really matters when you get in. As long as assuming you're still alive to get in. You know, posthumously, then I guess it sucks. But, you know, whether you got to wait 1 year or 10 years to get in, I think at the end of the day, it's one of those things where the ends justify the means.
I forgot he was part of that 2017. Oh, my God, that was such a shit show.
Yeah.
He was the best offensive player on that team, outside of Roddy White.
I was going to say outside of Roddy White. That's fair.
Oh God, that was such a shit show.
All right, other news that the Falcons had last week, we found out that DJ Tialavea is moving from tight end to offensive tackle. Scott, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on what this move says about the competition at both of those spots? Presumably, Tialavea wasn't really making roads at tight end, and at least there's a possibility, even with this sort of quick position switch, that he might be able to do something at offensive tackle.
I don't think he's going to be a good fit long-term at offensive tackle. I think he's too short. I think he's got the height and the length you really want at guard. And he's got the frame that kind of is more for a guard. He's got to gain about 25, 30 pounds to get to that 290 range, 295 range to really be worth it. I think he's going to be about a year or two before he really gets in there, which at his age, it's kind of tough for him as a bottom roster player at 26 years old to make a switch from tight end to tackle and really think that he's going to see a lot of playing time. I mean, it might end up working out. I do think he's got the size to where the length to where he could be a good solid swing tackle if they really wanted him to be. But overall, I would personally put him at guard and just have him bulk up and play guard.
Fair enough. Yeah, we'll see. I'll be curious to see how big he is when we see him on the field, because he's listed at 260, but it seemed like, to me at least last year, he looked like he was a little bit closer to 270, 275-ish. So I don't know if he has that much weight that he needs to gain in order to get up to that 290 plus range. Obviously, I don't expect him to put on that weight between now and the beginning of the regular season. So even if he does show some potential as an offensive lineman, I think probably his best case scenario is making the practice squad and sort of being stashed for a year and basically being an Adam Replogle, Jared Smith. Ben Garland made the switch from D tackle to offensive line a couple of years ago. And then obviously played both last year with the Falcons. And so, yeah, I think it's more of a long-term sort of project. So it's really more about, does he flash the athleticism and the physicality that you want at that position? And if he shows those two things, then I think it's worth, maybe stashing him on the practice squad and seeing what you can develop at him in the future. If not, then, I think T. LaVea will probably catch on somewhere else as a blocking tight end, because I do think he's probably the best blocking tight end on the roster currently. His issue is that he doesn't really add a whole lot in the passing game, which is, not many teams use strictly a blocking tight end today as they did in past years. So that sort of hurts his ability to stick on an NFL roster. But, I do think he's good enough to certainly play in this league and be a capable blocking tight end, like a poor man's Anthony Fasano or something like that. So we'll see what happens with him. All right. We talked about Devontae Freeman's contract extension not that long ago, I think right before training camp. There has been some talk about maybe that, things are looming or something like that. There was an interesting tweet from Devontae earlier today. I thought I saw where he put up prayer hands, which makes it seem like maybe something is looming, or, maybe we're reading into something maybe too long. But it was at least interesting that ESPN writer Dan Graziano talked about when a deal could get done, and he said, basically taking a shot in the dark, that he doesn't think a deal would get done no later than September. I think it was early. He said early September. Hopefully we see something happen before then. But any thoughts on sort of any of the updates with Devontae Freeman's contract situation, Scott?
I mean, I've seen things where it's like, hey, he's going to be getting paid $50 million over 5 years. And I'm like, that's a little too much money. Well, other than that, everything sounds about right. I was expecting it to get done before training camp. A couple of the agents I talked to were like, they've totally got something worked out. They're just finalizing details. Like, they've got the money itself worked out. They're totally just finalizing details, structure, guarantees, all that stuff. So the money side, like the total money, they've already agreed to. It's just everything else that they've got to put into place. And it's like a puzzle. So we'll see what happens.
Fair enough. All right. Let's get a little bit more deeper into the preseason matchup this week against the Dolphins. Typically, the last couple of years when the Falcons play the Dolphins, it usually results in Falcon fans panicking over something. 2 years ago was the offensive line. Last year was Matt Ryan and his interceptions. So, to me, the big question this year is going to be, what are we going to panic about this year? Maybe Jay Cutler puts up, leads the team right down the field for an 80-yard scoring drive on the first series, and everybody's like, oh, no, the defense isn't coming together. I have no idea. I'm guessing here. But,
I would put money on that happening, actually, because I can see Dan Quinn running the same exact, basic ass, all right, guys, cover 3. Base package, cover 3. Base package, cover 3. Base package, cover 3. And running that the entire drive. And then Jay Cutler just sitting back there. Oh, there's no pressure because Courtney Upshaw is rushing me. Yeah, I see that happening. And people are just going, what the fuck is going on? Why does the defense suck? Come on, Joe.
I do love preseason hot takes. They are fun.
I think the best preseason hot take we had was the Bernard Reedy year.
Yeah.
He had, one good play, and then everybody was like, he had an 80-yard touchdown in that game. He's going to be on the final roster. He's going to start. And I'm like, no.
Yeah. I'm always looking forward to seeing who's the guy who has one play and all of a sudden, makes huge fans because, they busted a 40-yard run or something like that. So the interesting thing about the first preseason game is, at least the last couple of years, the starters usually only play one series. Last year against the Redskins, the Falcons played two series because the first one was a 3-and-out, and then the second one was a 3-and-out. And so basically, if the starters don't suck on the first drive, they will play one series and then they're done. If they do suck, then there's a possibility they might throw them out there for a second series. I imagine the offensive line will probably play two series so they can give one to Ben Garland and one to Wes Schweitzer. And so they'll have Alex Mack and all those guys playing two series. That's my best guess. I don't know that for a fact. They might just play them the first series and be done with it. But just to have both of those guys on the even playing field, I do expect them to do that. We know with the injuries, the Falcons have already ruled out Julio Jones and Taylor Gabriel. Kevin Graff, as I mentioned before, is also out. Martin Effetti, B.J. Daniels will not play. And right now, Quinn said it was basically a game-time decision with Takk McKinley. It sounds like he's healthy enough to play. It's just whether or not he's gotten enough reps that the team feels comfortable with throwing him out there, I guess. So we got a question from Evan Birchfield. He asked, are there any specific players that you're looking forward to seeing play on Thursday?
Offensive line specifically, I'm looking to see how the depth at wide receiver looks. I'm looking to see how the returners look. Specifically, I'd love to see what C.J. Goodwin and Poole and all of these guys look like. I'd like to see what Ishmael looks like as a full-time linebacker, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. Dan Quinn talked up the wide receiver depth in the battle at the wide receiver and running back position before camp. I'm curious to see if that's legitimate. Guys like Brian Hill and Teron Ward. We will probably see Devontae Freeman get 2 carries. We'll probably see Tevin Coleman get 2 carries, and then they're done. And then it's just going to be the Brian Hill, Teron Ward show. And so I do want to see those guys duke it out. With those second and third string lines. I want to see some of these young wide receivers just because I don't really think any of them are really going to make the team. But I do want to see if there's a couple of guys here or there that sort of look like we can sort of stash on the practice squad for this year and then maybe groom them to be the 4th or 5th receiver next year or something like that. So, guys like Reggie Davis or Marvin Hall, you've heard people talk about, Nick Williams is unkillable at this point. So he's always a fun guy to watch in the preseason. And obviously the offensive line, that's going to be a big issue on the offense. I want to see those tackles compete, see who's sort of up to speed, and also Garland and Schweitzer. So those are some of the battles that I'm looking forward to on the offense. Defensively, I am curious to see how much Duke Riley gets to play. I imagine he'll play probably the whole first half. I wouldn't see why he wouldn't play a lot in the game. So I'll be curious to see if he'll go out there and make some plays, and some of the other linebackers to see if some of those guys can sort of emerge, because I think there's an opportunity for one of these guys like Jermaine Grace or Jacqueline or whoever to land as the 6th linebacker behind guys like Riley and Ishmael and Reynolds and whatnot. And obviously the cornerback situation, even though the last couple of summers we have, the preseason teams are so vanilla that it's hard to evaluate cornerbacks because these second and third string quarterbacks aren't really good, and the wide receivers aren't really good enough to really challenge guys. So you might see like one target per game, and it's going to be like 3 feet over the wide receiver's head, so you can't really tell if the coverage was good. So it's one of those things. Like last year, it was impossible to tell who was good in the cornerback position because literally every throw was like a 5-yard out or like a crossing route or a check down. And so hopefully we get to see these guys get challenged a little bit more this summer so we can actually evaluate them a little bit. But if not, then we'll just wait till the regular season happens, I guess. Okay.
We're not going to really see anything at quarterback outside of with Schaub, who gets semi-decent players.
Yeah. All right. So we got a couple of mailbag questions. First one comes from young Zach. He asks, who do you think will emerge as the number 2 receiving option this year for Matt Ryan in terms of yards and receptions?
Ooh. This is a fun one because I'm going to put in a name that Aaron may not expect. I'm going to go with Austin Hooper.
Huh?
I think he's going to jump up as a tight end, and where Gabriel and Sanu are good, and I think they're going to stay around that, Sanu getting 60 catches for 600 yards. Gabriel's going to get like 40 catches for 500 yards. I think we're going to see Austin Hooper get up there to be about 60 catches for 800, 900 yards and really be that true number 2 option. Because we all saw what happened when Matt Ryan had a true tight end he could throw to in Tony Gonzalez. Tony was basically the number 2 in 09 and 10 because Ryan had a good solid possession receiver in Michael Jenkins. And then he had a good number 1 in Roddy White, and then he had Tony Gonzalez. So I think we're going to see the same kind of situation with Austin Hooper. And I think Hooper's going to he's going to break out because he's got the talent to break up the seams. He's got the talent to just kind of, to just sit there and box out defenders the way Tony Gonzalez did right in the middle of the field that we haven't seen tight ends really do. Like I like Jacob Tammy, but he wasn't sitting there getting right in front of a linebacker and then doing a quick out move to get a first down. He just wasn't doing it. I think we'll see that from Hooper this year. And we'll see him and we'll be like, holy crap, this kid's really, really good. And he's good after the catch, which is an even more important thing. Because you want a guy who can run that 10-yard out, catch it, and then still get another 3-4 yards after that at the end of the play.
Okay. Look, I think it's pretty it's Mohamed Sanu. I mean, it's one of those things where, like, I do think Hooper will have a good season, but I think my personal opinion is I think people are going a little bit overboard on the Hooper hype right now, just because, there's nothing else to hype about the offense because there's really nothing new about the offense other than Austin Hooper. I think he'll have a productive year, don't get me wrong, but I don't expect him to put up monster numbers because I think the issue Hooper dealt with last season, and I think will continue to deal with in the NFL, is he's not really a matchup guy. Like, his whole success in the NFL, in my opinion, is not going to be because he creates mismatches. It's going to be because Matt Ryan trusts him. And I don't expect Matt Ryan to have that level of trust in him from the jump this season that would allow him to put up monster numbers where he's going to get 5 to 8 targets every week. There are going to be some games where he will do that. And then there's going to be some games where he gets like 2 or 3 targets. And I just don't really see him putting up the monster numbers that I think a lot of people are doing. To me, where Hooper's going to make a difference, if anywhere, I think it's going to be more in the red zone, where with all the attention that Julio Jones gets, it creates one-on-one opportunities for other guys, and the Falcons were very effective at using that in last year and in past years. And I think if Hooper's going to shine anywhere, it's going to be more in the red zone than sort of between the 20s. I think Sanu, if we're talking yards, if we're talking targets, if we're talking, all that sort of stuff that we always talk about, I think he's clearly the number 2 guy. I think he'll be a bigger part of the offense this year than he was last year, just because I think losing guys like Alec Robinson. I don't think the team is going to be able to rely on their running backs to create as many mismatches, particularly Tevin Coleman. One of the things last year you saw with Tevin Coleman was after that Denver game, teams basically made adjustments, and he never really had another really big game after that point. I don't think it's because the team just stopped using him. I think it's because opposing teams made adjustments at that point. So I think Sanu's probably going to put up better numbers this year. I don't expect his numbers to be like a huge spike unless, something bad happens to Julio Jones, which, knock on wood, doesn't happen. But I do think Sanu will be the clear-cut number 2. I think Gabriel might eat into some of his production, but I think Gabriel, for a good portion of the season, they might be neck and neck. But I do think the amount of reps that Sanu will get will allow him to sort of be, if we're talking about production, Sanu will be the number 2. All right. Young Zach also asked, do you think Dan Quinn will continue to run as many stunts and twists with the D-line or a more traditional pass rush?
That is a traditional pass rush. I don't know what exactly you're asking here. The traditional pass rush is take 4 guys and throw them up front and run your twists, run your stunts, run your offsets, and let the back 7 do their thing in coverage. That's a traditional defensive line. Traditional pass rush. Now, I do think he'll blitz a little bit more. I think we'll see a little bit more sets with Devondre Campbell on the field in nickel situations. I think we'll see some 3-3-5 and even some 2-4-5 sets where you got like Jarrett and Poe in there as 3 techniques rushing, and then you've got Beasley and Campbell coming from standing spots with Riley and Jones in the middle, and you'll just have that all set up, and you'll have those guys running twists and stunts and doing crazy stuff off the edges. You'll have some sets where you'll have McKinley and Beasley rushing off the same side, just overloading a left tackle. We're going to see some crazy stuff in nickel this year. I have a feeling about that, just because Beasley took off last year. And the one thing that we all saw with Beasley last year that was frustrating as hell to watch was a stance. He would get way too low and way too extended in his stance off the ball. And DeMarcus Ware told him this year, fix your stance, do this. So hopefully he takes it to heart and really learns how to explode off the ball even more with a better stance, and we'll see even more pass rush coming out of him. Because I think if we get a lot more out of Beasley, the rest is just all going to set into place. We're going to see Grady Jarrett come in and take that third-year step. We're going to see Dontari Poe really enjoy himself out there because he's going to be playing a role he played at Memphis as opposed to the role he played over in Kansas City, which is just sit in the one gap, bust through a center and a guard. Sit in the one gap, bust through a center and a guard. Basically what they need to be playing Hageman. So run them in a 60-40 split where all they're doing every single play is busting through a one gap or through the A gap, and everybody will be happy. And I think we'll have everything set into place with this pass rush. And we will continue to see a ton of twists and stunts and just crazy different things that Dan Quinn likes to run because that's how he runs a defensive line. I'm not going to complain with how he runs twists and stunts because it creates pass rush. And we've all been asking for pass rush.
Okay, all good points, Scott. I think I get what Zach is saying because I sort of agree with him. I think last year they ran so many stunts out of necessity because they couldn't just basically line up 4 guys and have them, do their normal traditional thing with their sort of individual moves and rushing the quarterback and winning that way. They just weren't able to create reliable pressure that way. So, I hope the plan is no, because that would mean that you'll see more instances of Vic Beasley and Tack and Brooks and Rashid and Don Terry and Grady and Courtney and Jack and all those guys being able to line up and just going out there and doing their own thing and being able to win that way, as opposed to sort of scheming rush and particularly with Beasley, particularly in the second half of the season, where a lot of his pressures came because he was either as a spy or stunting, and you would like to see him being able to make that leap where he won't have to, not to diminish what he did, but where the scheme is more manufacturing that rush than he alone is manufacturing that rush. So, yeah, I would hope that we see a little bit more of a traditional rush, because it means that guys like Beasley and Grady Jarrett don't need to stunt in order to create those pressures, and sort of can use the rip and the swim and the spin and the dip and all that stuff to win. But I think the thing with Dan Quinn is if that doesn't work, then he'll by no means not twist and stunt, and he'll certainly use it, even if that's the case, and those guys are able to win on their own. So he'll figure it out, and it'll hopefully work out well. Hopefully we'll have a fearsome pass rush that when we play a team like Minnesota later in the season, we're just going to be laughing at sort of how much we're going to dominate their offensive line in that game, and Sam Bradford, is crying in the corner because of he's getting hit like 12 times in that game and sacked like 5 times. So that's the goal. And whether we got to twist and stunt to do it, or we can just line up 4 guys and say, go hunt, hopefully they can get the job done regardless.
Yeah, I'm cool either way. As long as they're fucking destroying quarterbacks, and pardon my language, as long as they're destroying quarterbacks, who cares?
Yeah, I mean, it's another situation where the ends justify the means. So, in an ideal world, you could just say, go out there and do your job, you 4. And I agree with you, Scott. I do think they'll probably be a little bit more aggressive with the blitz. They were one of the teams that blitzed the least last year. And, hopefully I think one of the reasons why moving Campbell to the strong side will help is because he's a little bit better of a pass rusher than Philip Wheeler is, at least in terms of putting his hand in the dirt and getting after guys. All right. Our next question comes from Evan Birchfield. He asks, thoughts on the new preseason rules where you don't make cuts until the last game?
Oh, I think it's brilliant. I think it was done so that teams won't have nearly as many injuries. When you've got guys and you got to cut it down from, 90 to 75, that's 15 guys that you don't really get that final look at in that 4th game. So you do have to play certain players that you wouldn't normally play in that final game that you're like, these guys have roster spots. I'd say by that final game, you probably have 40, 41 guys who you're like, these guys are all set on the roster. And you just want to see what those last, 49, 48 guys will do. So instead of just having, say, 30 guys that you can use now you've got that 48, 49 guys, and you're going to have less injuries. You're going to have less guys going out in that 4th game where you're like, why the hell is this guy playing in this 4th game? And you'll just be like, all right, well, if Matt Bosher has to go out there, Matt Bosher has to go out there and punt, If this kicker, Mike Meyer, has to go out there and you try him as a punter to where Matt Bosher doesn't have some freak knee injury. Yeah, I know I'm talking about a punter, but like even that kind of situation you want to prevent in a preseason game. So, you protect those guys that have guaranteed roster spots. And for those last 10, 12 spots that you're really close on, instead of cutting 15 guys who might be on that bubble, you give them a shot. Maybe they give you something in that 4th preseason game where they're playing a full quarter and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't see that in camp. I didn't see that anywhere else. That's really impressive. I want to see him do that in a game for me in the regular season. So I think it's good for the players. I think it's going to help reduce injuries. And I think that those bottom roster guys who don't really get that true shot until the 4th game, like, you finally get to give them that shot in that 4th game.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's mostly a net positive. I can't, any negatives to the rule change or sort of minor sort of issues. Nothing aggravated me more the last couple of summers watching Jonathan Babineau playing in the 4th preseason game. Like he's, we're better than that. For the most part, the when they cut down from 90 to 75 the week before that last preseason game, most of the time those 15 guys, you could always predict who those first 15 guys were because they're the guys that didn't play. They played the least in the first 3 preseason games. So it's one of those things where having those guys get another opportunity in that 4th preseason game to sort of show their stuff, because obviously that, being able to carry those extra 15 guys means there's potentially 15 starters that you don't have to play that will get completely rested, or do what Dan Quinn often does and throw Matt Ryan and Julio Jones out there for 1 snap. I don't know why he does that, but Dan Quinn is a funny guy, I guess. And doing that a little bit more with the starting offensive line often plays in that first preseason game and plays multiple series because they just don't have enough bodies to play 8 or so 7 or 8 offensive linemen for the entire game or whatnot. So if they can get a few extra bodies across the roster, those 15 guys, then I think it's generally beneficial. I guess it makes it a little bit harder to maybe sneak a couple of guys through the first cuts and whatnot because everybody gets dumped at once. Or maybe it's a little bit harder for the teams to make sure everybody gets as many opportunities in the early games because the assumption is, we'll just play them in the 4th preseason game, and maybe that maybe hurt an individual player here or there or something like that because they might only play like 6 snaps prior to that last game or something like that. But again, those are just minor issues. I think generally speaking, it's a very good rule, and I think it will help more guys increase the chances that they can stick around, and I think it will make teams a little bit healthier going into the regular season because, we've had so many guys go on IR because they got an injury in that last preseason game. Colin Mooney, I feel like there was a tight end last year that got hurt or something like that, but I can't remember. But it's one of those things where it's like, there's always a couple of guys that make it all through the preseason. I remember, I think it was Jordan Beck back in like 2005, the 3rd round pick we had out of, I think, San Jose State or something.
Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo.
Oh, okay. One of them sand schools in California, I know. I think he got hurt in that last preseason game, and basically we never heard from him again. So, maybe even Devin Fuller got hurt in the last preseason game last year. So, it sucks for those guys, but there's always, it seems to be, a couple of guys that you lose in that last preseason game that you don't want to wind up losing. Which I guess now, it exposes the bottom roster guys to more risk, which sucks for them. But, for the rest of your roster, I guess it's positive. I don't know. All right, last question comes from Evan Birchfield. He asks, are you going to check out the Bucs on Hard Knocks, which is on as we talk?
Hell no. We already watched the Bucs on Hard Knocks because we watched the Falcons on Hard Knocks in 2014. It's the same coaching staff. I hate to say it this way. I don't give a shit about watching these same coaching staffs over and over again. We know how cheesy and how boring Dirk Cutter and Mike Smith are. Do we really have to go into more of Dirk Cutter and Mike Smith?
I might watch it. Like, I didn't watch the Rams last year. I watched like 4 seconds of the Rams Hard Knocks. I just was not interested. If people say it's good, I'll probably watch it. I mean, usually, I watch the Texans, I watch the Bengals. Obviously, I watch the Falcons, which, if we're being honest, was pretty boring relative to other Hard Knock seasons. So this one could be a boring season. I think the Bucs have a little bit more interesting personalities on the roster than the Falcons did back in 2014. I know that may be blasphemous for some people to hear, but I think Jameis Winston and Deshaun Jackson and Mike Evans and Levante David and Gerald McCoy make probably a little bit more, and Miko Grimes, the great Miko Grimes, probably make a little bit more compelling TV show than Matt Ryan and Croy Bierman and Bear Pasco, so
I would love to tell her exactly what I think about her.
There's our producer Brian, ladies and gentlemen, for anybody who's caught off guard, like who's that third person? I am a ventriloquist, so yeah. Look, it could be good. I don't know. I'm not gonna. I probably won't watch the first episode. I mean, it's on right now, so obviously I'm not watching it right now. But if people say, "Oh, that was good," I might check it out. All right, there you go, guys. That's our show. We hope you appreciate it. Hopefully, the Falcons come out of the preseason game injury-free this upcoming Thursday. We will be talking about that on next week's show. We'll be talking about what we thought of that game, who we thought stood out, who we think did not stand out, all that stuff. In order to help us out, then please send in your mailbag questions. You can use the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. The show's Twitter handle is FalconsPFC. My Twitter handle is FalcFans. You can see that at the bottom of the screen somewhere below here. Scott is at Karasik S. That's somewhere, I don't know, one of these sides. Also, ProFootballCentral.com. We're working on getting the iTunes feed. If you guys have been experiencing issues getting the iTunes feed, we're aware of the problem. We're trying to fix the problem, so hopefully that gets fixed. But I think you should be able to find it on the main Pro Football Central feed. There's a link at ProFootballCentral.com that says subscribe to that. Unfortunately, you'll have to download some Patriots Central Radio as well, but you can always sort of skip those or delete those or whatnot. I know our producer Brian is saying download them all, but YouTube, also Pro Football Central on YouTube.
Don't waste your time with the Patriots. Everything.
There you go. You set us up for that, Scott.
Wait till we find out. Wait till we find out in 5 years what the scandal was for this one. I don't think you could ever hate the Patriots more than me. Oh, that would only work if I actually respected LeVar Ball. But that's a whole other conversation.
Well, this thing got off the rails real quick. So, all right, guys, that's it. I think that's all we need to plug. So we'll be back next week to talk about the Falcons preseason
game.